Marrying a plumber is social suicide. That is exactly what my mother Vernice hissed at me across the dinner table. She called my fiancé a stain on our family reputation and a disgrace to everything she had built in Atlanta. My sister Bianca laughed and asked if we would be serving tap water at the reception. They turned their backs on me. I walked down the aisle with no parents and no sister on my side. I cried myself to sleep on my wedding night, feeling like an orphan. But 2 weeks later, everything changed. We were sitting in silence when the TV screen lit up during prime time. There was my husband, not fixing a toilet but accepting a national award for a water filtration patent worth $400 million. My phone started ringing. It did not stop. 138 missed calls, but by then it was too late to pick up. My name is Dominique, and at 32 years old, I thought I knew what humiliation felt like. I was wrong. It started last Friday at Le Bilboquet. If you know Atlanta, you know this is the most pretentious restaurant in Buckhead. It is the kind of place where they judge your net worth by your shoes before you even open your mouth. We were there to celebrate my sister Bianca and her husband Brad announcing their vow renewal. But I had brought Dante to finally introduce him to the family. He was running late. A massive water main break at the elementary school in Southside had kept him working overtime. He texted me that he was coming straight from the site because he did not want to miss the toast. I stood outside the heavy oak doors, waiting for him, feeling a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. Ferraris and Porsches lined the valet stand. The air smelled of expensive perfume and old money. Then Dante walked up the driveway. He was wearing his blue work coveralls. His name Dante was stitched in white thread on the left chest pocket. He was clean. I knew he had scrubbed his hands raw with industrial soap before coming here because he respected me. But to the maitre d' standing at the podium, he looked like trash. The host stepped in front of Dante with a sneer blocking his path. "Deliveries are around the back," he said without even making eye contact. His voice was dripping with disdain. I stepped forward quickly, my heels clicking on the pavement. "He is not a delivery driver," I said, keeping my voice steady. "He is my fiancé, and he is dining with the Williams party." The host looked Dante up and down, taking in the heavy work boots and the utility belt Dante had forgotten to take off. "I am afraid we have a strict dress code," he said, crossing his arms. Before I could argue, the heavy doors swung open. Brad, my brother-in-law, stepped out, holding a crystal glass of scotch. He was wearing a suit that probably cost more than my car. I thought for a second he was coming to help us. I was so naive. Brad saw Dante and a cruel grin spread across his face. He didn't lower his voice. He projected it so everyone in the valet line could hear. "Hey everyone, look, the help is finally here." He turned to the security guard and laughed. "It is okay, let him in. I think the toilet in the men's room is clogged again." Laughter erupted from the people standing nearby. My face burned with shame. I looked at Dante, expecting him to be angry or to turn around and leave. But he didn't flinch. He just stood there tall and calm, looking Brad straight in the eye with a terrifying kind of silence. Brad took a sip of his scotch and smirked. "Come on in, Plumber, try not to get grease on the tablecloths." Dante pulled out the chair next to me, but before he could sit, my mother Vernice lunged forward with the speed of a viper striking its prey. She snatched a starched white linen napkin from the center of the table and spread it dramatically over the dark velvet cushion. Her movements were sharp and deliberate, ensuring every eye at our table and the surrounding ones was drawn to her performance. "Just a precaution," she said loudly enough for the neighboring table to hear. "This silk upholstery is imported from Italy. We cannot have industrial grime ruining it. The restaurant charges a fortune for damages, and I assume you do not have that kind of liability coverage in your line of work." My face burned hot. Dante was cleaner than any of them. He had showered at the facility before coming here, but to them, his blue-collar uniform was a contamination suit. Dante did not blink. He sat down on the napkin slowly with a dignity that made their behavior look even more childish. "Thank you, Mrs. Williams," he said, his voice steady and calm. "I appreciate you looking out for the furniture." My sister Bianca did not let the awkward silence linger. She extended her left hand across the table, waving it directly in Dante's face. The diamond on her finger was huge, 4 carats of ostentatious sparkle that blinded under the crystal chandelier. I knew for a fact Brad had financed it across 3 different credit cards. But in this moment, she looked like royalty, and she wanted Dante to feel like a peasant. "It is breathtaking, isn't it, Dante?" she asked, batting her false eyelashes. "Brad went to Tiffany yesterday. But I guess you would not know much about diamonds, would you?" She suddenly grabbed Dante's hand and pulled it onto the center of the table next to the flower arrangement. She gasped in mock horror, running a perfectly manicured finger over his rough knuckles and the small scar on his thumb. "Oh my God, look at these calluses," she shrieked. "They are like sandpaper. How do you even touch my sister with these hands without scratching her skin off? It must be like holding hands with a construction site. Dominique, does your skin get raw just being near him?" Brad chuckled, sipping his scotch and leaning back with a smug grin. "Hey, those hands unclog drains, honey," he said. "Show some respect for the sanitation workers of America. Someone has to deal with the filth so people like us do not have to." I felt the rage boiling in my throat like lava. I opened my mouth to scream at them, to tell them that Dante's hands built systems that saved lives, but my mother beat me to it. She reached for her heavy crystal goblet of ice water. Her eyes locked with mine, cold and calculating. With a casual flick of her wrist, she tipped the glass. Ice water cascaded onto Dante's lap, soaking his heavy work pants instantly. The ice cubes clattered onto the floor. The table went deadly silent. My mother did not even pretend to reach for a towel. She just smiled a tight, cruel smile and signaled the waiter for a refill. "Oh dear," she said without an ounce of regret in her voice. "Well, it is not a disaster. You are used to being wet anyway, aren't you, Dante? Since you play in toilets all day, a little clean water should be a refreshing change for you. Maybe it will help wash off the smell." The waiter approached our table with the discreet silence of a ghost holding the black leather check presenter. I reached for my purse instinctively, knowing that a bill at Le Bilboquet could easily cover a mortgage payment in some parts of the country. But Brad intercepted the waiter with a snap of his fingers. He snatched the leather folder from the man's hand and opened it slowly, letting out a low whistle that sounded more like a jeer than surprise. $2,400. Brad announced the total to the table, raising his eyebrows at my father. He then slid the black folder across the white tablecloth until it hit the edge of Dante's water glass with a sharp thud. "You want to be the man of the house?" Dominique, Brad asked, leaning forward, his elbows digging into the table. "You want to marry into the Williams family? Then show us you can provide. Prove you are not just looking for a handout. Pick up the tab." My mother Vernice covered her mouth to hide a smile. She knew exactly what Brad was doing. They all believed Dante was living paycheck to paycheck on a plumber's wage. They thought this bill would bankrupt him for the month. They wanted to see him sweat. They wanted him to admit he couldn't afford a single dinner in their world. I felt the blood drain from my face. "Brad, this is ridiculous," I snapped, reaching for the check myself. "I invited him. I am paying." Dante's hand moved faster than mine. He placed his large palm over the leather folder, stopping me. His hand was warm and rough against the cool leather. He did not look at the bill. He did not even blink at the number Brad had announced. "I got it," he said, his voice dropping an octave. Brad laughed, a short barking sound. "Do they take iOS in your neighborhood, Dante? Or do you need to call your boss for an advance?" Dante stood up slowly. The chair scraped against the floor. He reached into the deep front pocket of his work coveralls, the one with the grease stain that my mother had been eyeing with disgust all night. He pulled out a thick roll of cash held together by a simple rubber band. The table went silent. It was not a wallet, it was a wad of $100 bills. To my family, this looked trashy. It looked like drug money or under-the-table labor. They did not understand that when you own the company, you do not need credit to prove your worth. Dante snapped the rubber band off and began peeling off bills. 1, 2, 3. He counted out $2,500 with a rhythmic precision, placing the crisp notes directly onto the tablecloth next to the untouched check. "Keep the change," he told the waiter who was staring wide-eyed at the cash. Dante looked down at Brad. Brad was staring at the money, his greed momentarily outweighing his arrogance. I could see him calculating how many overdraft fees that cash could cover. I opened my mouth to scream at them, to tell them that this game was cruel and pathetic. But Dante turned to me. He placed a hand on my shoulder and squeezed gently. His eyes were dark and intense, like the ocean before a hurricane. There was no fear in them, only a terrifying calm. It was a look that said, "Do not interfere." It was a look that promised a reckoning was coming, but not here, and not tonight. "We are leaving," Dante said. And for the first time that night, nobody at the table dared to say a word, as he guided me away from the only family I had ever known. The sun had barely risen over the Atlanta skyline when the vibration of a cell phone shattered the morning silence. It was exactly 6 o'clock. Dante was already awake, standing by the window with a mug of black coffee, his silhouette framed by the orange glow of dawn. He looked at the caller ID and his jaw tightened. He walked over to the bed where I was still waking up and held the phone out so I could see the screen. It was my father, Elijah. Dante did not say a word. He simply pressed the answer button and tapped the speaker icon, placing the phone on the nightstand between us. He wanted me to hear this. He needed me to know exactly who we were dealing with. "Good morning, Dante." My father's voice boomed into the quiet room. He sounded crisp and businesslike, as if he were closing a deal rather than calling his future son-in-law at the crack of dawn. "I assume you are awake. People in your line of work usually have to punch a clock by now, right?" Dante took a sip of coffee. "Good morning, Elijah. To what do I owe the pleasure?" "I want to cut to the chase," my father said. "I saw the little stunt you pulled with the cash last night. Very theatrical. But we both know that was probably your entire life savings. Maybe even a loan shark advance. You made your point, but let us be realistic. You cannot afford my daughter." I sat up in bed, pulling the sheets tight against my chest. My heart began to pound against my ribs. "I am prepared to offer you a one-time settlement," my father continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. $50,000. Cash. Wiring it to you today. All you have to do is break off the engagement. Tell her you got cold feet. Tell her you found someone else. I do not care what lie you tell, just make her go away. Dante looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and resolve. "And why would you pay that much to get rid of me, Elijah?" Dante asked. "Because I am trying to save this family from embarrassment," my father snapped. "And frankly, I am doing you a favor, son. Dominique is a sweet girl, but let us be honest. She is the weak link in this family. She has no ambition. She works for a charity, for God's sake. She brings nothing to the table but emotional baggage. If you marry her, you inherit her debts and her mediocrity. I am offering you a clean break and enough money to fix whatever debts you undoubtedly have. Take the 50 grand and walk away before you drown." Tears streamed down my face, hot and fast. Hearing my own father call me the weak link, the mediocrity, confirmed every insecurity I had ever felt growing up in his house. Dante leaned over and spoke directly into the microphone, his voice dropping to a lethal calm. "Keep your money, Elijah. In fact, you should probably put that 50,000 into a high-yield savings account. Based on what I saw of your son-in-law's spending habits last night, you are going to need every penny of it very soon." Dante hung up the phone before my father could respond. The room fell silent again, but the air had changed. The sadness in me was evaporating, replaced by a cold, hard anger. They did not just hate Dante, they despised me. And that was the fuel I needed for what was coming next. I thought my father's bribery attempt was the lowest my family could sink. I was wrong. My sister Bianca did not just want to ruin my engagement, she wanted to erase my existence. I was sitting at my desk at the nonprofit, trying to focus on a grant proposal, when my phone screen lit up with an Instagram notification. "Bianca Williams is live." My stomach turned. Bianca only went live when she wanted attention or when she wanted to destroy someone. Against my better judgment, I tapped the screen. There she was, sitting in her massive walk-in closet surrounded by designer bags that I knew were mostly leased. She had her ring light set to the highest brightness, making her skin look porcelain perfect. She was wiping away a fake tear. "Hey guys," she chirped, her voice dripping with manufactured sweetness. "I have the most amazing news. Brad and I have been doing so much soul-searching lately. We realized that our love is just too big for one wedding. So we have decided to renew our vows." My heart stopped. Bianca and Brad had been married for less than 2 years. Vow renewals were for couples celebrating decades together, not for people whose wedding china was still in the box. "We are throwing the biggest, most exclusive party Atlanta has ever seen," she continued, holding up a gold foil invitation. "And we are doing it on a very special date, June 12th. I dropped my phone on the desk. June 12th. That was my wedding date. The date I had announced to the family group chat 3 months ago. The date I had already put deposits down for. She knew. She absolutely knew. The comments on the live stream started rolling in. "Congratulations! Oh my God, so romantic. Can we come?" Bianca leaned closer to the camera, her expression shifting from sweet to conspiratorial. "Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Isn't that the same day as my sister Dominique's little get-together?" She paused for dramatic effect, letting a small, cruel smile play on her lips. "Yes, it is. And honestly, that is why we are doing this. We want to save you guys from a disaster." I felt like I couldn't breathe. She was doing this publicly, to thousands of followers, to all our mutual friends and extended family. "Look, guys, you have a choice to make," Bianca said, examining her manicure. "You can come to the St. Regis with us, where there will be open-bar premium champagne and a performance by a surprise celebrity guest. Or you can go to Dominique's thing." She laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Honestly, I love my sister, but let us be real. She is marrying a plumber. If you want a night of elegance and class, come to my party. If you prefer the smell of raw sewage and maybe some cheap beer, then by all means go to Dominique's. But do not say I didn't warn you when you catch something nasty." The comments exploded with laughing emojis. Team Bianca hashtags started flooding the screen. My phone immediately began to buzz with text messages. Not from people defending me, but from cousins and aunts. "Hey Dom, so sorry. Something came up on the 12th. We can't make it anymore, hope you understand. Maybe we can grab coffee another time." They were not just canceling. They were choosing sides. In a matter of 5 minutes, my sister had forced our entire social circle to pick between her fantasy world and my reality, and almost everyone was choosing the champagne. I stared at the screen where Bianca was blowing kisses to her fans. She had declared war. She did not just want to outshine me. She wanted me to walk down that aisle to an empty room. She wanted to prove that without the family approval, I was nobody. I picked up my phone and typed a message to Dante. "We need to talk. They are trying to bury us." His reply came 10 seconds later. "Let them dig. They are just making the hole deep enough to bury themselves." The knock on my door 3 days later was not a request. It was a demand. I opened the door of my one-bedroom apartment to find my mother standing in the hallway wearing a Chanel suit that cost more than my car. She did not say hello. She simply pushed past me into the living room, her nose wrinkling as if she had just stepped into a garbage dump. "It smells like pine sol in here," she said, running a gloved finger over my IKEA bookshelf. "I suppose that fits your new lifestyle. Cheap and abrasive." I closed the door and crossed my arms. "What do you want, Mother? I have a shift at the shelter in an hour." Vernice did not sit down. She opened her crocodile skin Birkin bag and pulled out a thick document bound in blue legal paper. She dropped it onto my coffee table with a heavy thud. It landed next to a stack of bridal magazines. "This is an amendment to the Williams Family Trust," she said. "Your father and I drafted it this morning with our attorney. It is very simple, Dominique. If you marry Dante Williams, you are immediately removed as a beneficiary. You will receive nothing, no inheritance, no dividends, no access to the emergency medical fund. You will be cut off completely. I looked at the document. I knew exactly what was in that trust. It was millions of dollars. It was financial security for generations. It was the golden handcuffs my parents had used to control me my entire life. You are forcing me to choose between money and my future husband, I asked, my voice trembling slightly. I am forcing you to choose between dignity and poverty, she corrected me. If you marry that man, you are choosing a life of struggle. I am just formalizing the consequences. Sign the annulment papers we prepared, or say goodbye to your birthright. She looked at me with a triumphant gleam in her eyes. She thought she had won. She thought that, like Bianca, I would do anything to keep the credit cards working. She thought I was afraid of being poor. She did not realize that I had already learned what real wealth was. I walked over to the table and picked up the document. The paper felt heavy and expensive in my hands. I looked at the legal jargon, the clauses designed to manipulate and control. I thought about Dante coming home tired but happy. I thought about his integrity. I thought about how he tipped waitresses 50% and stopped to help strangers change tires in the rain. I looked my mother dead in the eye. Then I gripped the top of the document and ripped it down the middle. The sound of tearing paper was loud in the small apartment. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her pearl necklace. "What are you doing?" she screeched. "That is a legal document." I tore it again and again until the trust fund was nothing but a pile of blue and white confetti on the floor. "Get out of my house, Mother," I said, pointing to the door, "and take your money with you. I would rather live in a cardboard box with Dante than live in a palace with people like you. Because frankly, Mother, your money is dirtier than any sewer Dante fixes. At least he cleans up filth. You just cover yours in designer labels." My mother stood there, mouth agape, her face turning a violent shade of red. She had never been spoken to like that in her life. She turned on her heel and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the pictures on my wall rattled. I stood in the silence, looking at the shredded paper on the floor, and for the first time in my life, I felt completely free. The house was a mid-century modern bungalow in East Atlanta with a wrap-around porch and a giant oak tree in the front yard. It was not a mansion like the one my parents lived in, but it had character. It had a soul. Most importantly, it was going to be ours. I had saved for the down payment for 5 years, skipping vacations and driving a 10-year-old Honda to make this moment possible. Dante had insisted on contributing, but I wanted to prove to my family and to myself that I could build a life without their trust fund money. We sat in the plush leather chairs of First Liberty Bank across from Mr. Henderson. He was a man I had known since I was a child, as he had managed my father's accounts for decades. Usually he greeted me with a warm smile and a peppermint candy from the crystal bowl on his desk. Today, he would not even look me in the eye. He was shuffling through our loan application papers, his hands trembling slightly. "I do not understand," I said, leaning forward. "My credit score is 780. I have been at my job for 6 years. We have 20% down in cash. What is the problem?" Mr. Henderson cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. He looked pained. "I am afraid the underwriting department has flagged your application as high risk, Dominique. The loan has been denied." Denied. The word hung in the air like smoke. I felt Dante stiffen beside me. High risk based on what Dante asked, his voice calm but possessing that dangerous edge I had heard at the restaurant. "My income is steady. We have no debt." Mr. Henderson sighed and looked at the closed door of his office to ensure we were alone. He leaned over the desk, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Look, Dominique, you did not hear this from me. On paper, you two are perfect candidates. This decision did not come from the underwriting algorithm. It came from the regional director's office this morning. There is a manual override on your file." My stomach dropped. The regional director. That was Brad's title. Brad flagged us, I whispered, feeling the bile rise in my throat. He put a character concern note on the file. Mr. Henderson confirmed, looking ashamed. He cited potential volatility in the primary earners industry and linked your profile to high-risk associations. In banking terms, he basically said lending to you is as risky as throwing money into a fire. As long as that flag is there, no branch in this state will touch you. I sat back in the chair, feeling like I had been punched in the gut. Brad was not just satisfied with mocking us at dinner. He was actively using his professional power to ensure we were homeless. He wanted to force me to crawl back to my parents. He wanted me to admit that I could not survive without their approval. Dante stood up slowly. He reached out and took the application folder from Mr. Henderson's desk. He did not yell. He did not threaten to sue. He simply closed the folder with a deliberate snap. "Thank you for your honesty, Mr. Henderson," Dante said. "I am sorry you have to work for a man like that." Dante took my hand and led me out of the bank. I was fighting back tears, terrified that my dream home was slipping away. I did not notice the way Dante pulled out his phone as soon as we hit the sidewalk. I did not see him send a text message to his holding company's legal team. All I knew was that my family had declared a total war on my happiness, and they had the weapons to win. Or so I thought. The rain began to fall as we drove away from the bank, a gray drizzle that matched the hollow feeling in my chest. I thought the rejection from the loan officer was the worst thing that would happen to me that day. I was naive. As Dante turned his truck onto my street, I saw a pile of debris on the sidewalk. It looked like trash waiting for pickup. Then I saw a flash of teal velvet. It was my armchair, the one I had bought with my first paycheck. Next to it was a box of books dissolving in the rain. "Stop the car!" I screamed. Dante slammed on the brakes and I jumped out before the truck had even come to a full stop. The rain was coming down harder now, soaking my blouse instantly. I ran to the pile. My clothes were in garbage bags. My lamps were broken. My entire life had been tossed onto the concrete like refuse. Mr. Russo, my landlord, was standing under the awning of the building holding a clipboard. He refused to look me in the eye. "What is going on?" I yelled, grabbing a wet box of photos. "My lease is not up for another 6 months. You cannot do this. It is illegal." Mr. Russo finally looked up. He looked tired. "It is not illegal if the building changes ownership, Dominique." The new owner invoked the renovation clause. He wants the building vacated immediately. He paid the penalty fees in cash. "New owner?" I asked, wiping water from my eyes. "Who buys a crumbling apartment building in East Atlanta on a Tuesday afternoon?" Mr. Russo flipped a page on his clipboard. He hesitated. "It was a direct purchase by Williams Real Estate Holdings. The contract was signed an hour ago." "Your father bought the building, Dominique. He bought the whole damn building just to kick you out." I felt the ground sway beneath me. My father. He had not just cut me off. He had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to buy a property he did not want just to ensure I had nowhere to sleep. He was not trying to teach me a lesson. He was trying to break my spirit. He wanted me to come crawling back home, wet and broken, begging for forgiveness. Dante appeared beside me. He had pulled a tarp from his truck and was covering my things. He did not waste time yelling at Mr. Russo. He did not waste energy on anger. He moved with the efficiency of a man who solved problems for a living. "He bought the building," Dante said, his voice cutting through the sound of the rain. "Good. That means he is desperate. He is spending real capital to fight us. That means we are winning, Dom." "Winning," I sobbed, holding a ruined photo of my grandmother. "We are homeless, Dante. We have no house, we have no apartment, we have nothing." Dante stopped. He grabbed my shoulders and turned me to face him. Rainwater dripped from his nose, but his eyes were burning with intensity. "We are not homeless. I have a place. It is not ready. It is a construction site. But it has a roof, and it is mine. He cannot buy it, and he cannot kick us out. Get in the truck." I looked back at the building one last time. My father thought this would break me, but as I watched Dante lift a heavy dresser into the truck bed with a single grunt of effort, I realized something. My father had money. But he did not have this. He did not have a man who would stand in the rain and rebuild a life from the wreckage. I wiped my face and climbed into the truck. The drive to Dante's property was silent. We left the city lights behind us, and the neighborhoods began to change. The manicured lawns of Buckhead gave way to the cracked pavement and chain-link fences of the industrial district. My heart sank lower with every mile. I had told my mother I would rather live in a box than under her control. But as Dante turned his truck onto a gravel road lined with overgrown kudzu, I was terrified that I had spoken a prophecy into existence. He pulled up to a structure that could barely be called a house. It was a small brick bungalow that looked like it had been abandoned for a decade. The roof shingles were curling like dead leaves. The windows were boarded up with plywood that had turned gray with rot. A no trespassing sign hung crookedly from a single nail on the front door. "Home sweet home," Dante said, killing the engine. I stared at the peeling paint, trying to force a smile, but my lip trembled. This was it. This was the bottom. My father had bought my building to evict me, and now I was standing in front of a teardown in the middle of nowhere. "It has good bones," Dante said, sensing my fear. He hopped out of the truck and walked to my side, opening the door. He did not look embarrassed. He looked at the rotting structure with the same affection he looked at me. I stepped out of the truck, and my heel immediately sank into the mud. I was about to ask if there was even running water, when a blinding light hit my face. A white Range Rover had pulled up silently on the street behind us. I squinted against the high beams. The window rolled down, and the sound of electronic dance music spilled out into the quiet night. Bianca was leaning out the driver's side window, her phone held high, the flash illuminating my misery. "Oh my God, you guys!" she shouted at her phone screen, broadcasting to her 50,000 followers. "I literally cannot make this up. Look where the princess has landed." She panned the camera from the rotting porch to Dante's muddy truck, and finally to me standing there in my wet clothes holding a box of kitchenware. "Mom was right," Bianca laughed. "You really did move into the gutter." "Hey Dom, do the rats pay rent or are they just roommates? And Dante, is this where you bring all your dates or just the desperate ones?" I felt naked, exposed. The shame was a physical weight on my chest. I wanted to scream at her to leave, but my voice was frozen. Bianca revved the engine. "Have fun with the roaches, sis. Don't worry, I will save you a piece of cake from my renewal party. You look like you are going to need the calories." She sped off, tires screeching, throwing gravel and mud onto the hem of my pants. I watched her taillights disappear into the darkness, leaving us alone in the silence. I slumped against the side of the truck, burying my face in my hands. "I am so sorry," I whispered. "I dragged you into this. They are never going to stop laughing at us." Dante reached out and took my chin in his hand, lifting my face. His eyes were not angry. They were dancing with a secret. "Let her film, Dom," he said softly, looking at the empty, overgrown lot that stretched for acres behind the house. "She sees a shack. I see 3 acres of commercial zoning rights I acquired last week. I see the headquarters for the new sustainable housing division. I see a smart villa that runs entirely on the hydro grid I designed." He kissed my forehead. "By the time we are done building here, her house will look like a garden shed. Now come on. I set up a generator inside. It is warm and dry. Let them laugh while they can." The bridal salon smelled of lavender and judgment. It was the kind of place where the sales associates wore black silk and looked at your handbag before deciding if they had an appointment available. I had made my appointment months ago, before my father bought my apartment building, and before my sister declared war on my wedding date. I should have canceled. I should have gone to a thrift store or worn a white sundress. But I wanted one moment, just one single moment, to feel like a bride. I found it on the clearance rack. It was a simple A-line gown with delicate lace sleeves. It did not have the train of a royal wedding dress or the crystals of a Disney princess gown, But when I looked in the mirror, I did not see the woman sleeping on an air mattress in a construction site. I saw Dominique, the woman Dante loved. I felt beautiful for the first time in weeks. I carried the dress to the counter, my hands trembling slightly. It was $800. A stretch for our current situation, but I had set aside this cash in my personal savings account specifically for this. I pulled out my debit card, the one linked to an account Brad and my father had no access to. Or so I thought. The sales associate, a woman with severe glasses and a tight bun, swiped the card. She frowned. She swiped it again. "I am sorry, miss," she said loudly enough for the other customers to hear. "This card has been declined. The system says the account is frozen due to suspected fraudulent activity." My blood ran cold. Frozen. Brad. He must have used his connections at the bank to flag my personal accounts too. He was not just blocking loans, he was strangling my liquidity. "Please try it again," I whispered, feeling the familiar heat of shame rising in my cheeks. "There is money in there. It has to be a mistake. It is not a mistake." The clerk sighed, sliding the card back across the glass counter like it was contaminated. "It says, 'Do not honor.' Do you have another form of payment?" Before I could answer, the heavy glass doors of the salon swung open. My mother Vernice swept in, followed closely by Bianca. They looked like they had stepped out of a magazine photo shoot. Bianca was glowing, holding a venti latte, while my mother barked orders at a terrified assistant trailing behind them. "Well, this is awkward," Bianca said, spotting me immediately. She walked over her heels, clicking sharply on the marble floor. She looked at the dress on the counter and then at my frozen face. "Card trouble, sis. I told you Brad has friends everywhere. You really should check your balance before you waste these people's time." My mother glided to the counter, ignoring me completely. She placed a platinum card on the glass surface. "We are here for Bianca's pickup," Vernice announced to the clerk. "The custom Vera Wang for the renewal. And add that veil we looked at last week. The cathedral-length one." The clerk's face transformed instantly. The disdain vanished, replaced by a sycophantic smile. "Of course, Mrs. Williams, right away." Vernice finally turned to look at me. She scanned my outfit, noting the mud on my boots from Dante's driveway. She looked at the modest dress on the counter and let out a short, derisive laugh. "Do not sell that to her," she said to the clerk, pointing a manicured finger at my gown. "She cannot afford it. And frankly, looking at her current living situation, she will just get it dirty before she even walks down the aisle. We cannot have the Williams name associated with a bride who looks like she rolled around in a pigsty." The clerk nodded, looking at me with renewed disgust. "I am afraid we cannot hold merchandise without a deposit, miss. If you cannot pay, you need to leave." I looked at my mother, expecting to see a flicker of hesitation, a moment of maternal regret. There was none. She was enjoying this. She was enjoying watching her daughter being treated like a vagrant. I grabbed my declined card and shoved it into my pocket. I did not cry. I was done crying for them. I looked at the dress one last time, saying a silent goodbye to the only piece of traditional bridal joy I had hoped for. "Keep the dress," I said to the clerk, my voice shaking with suppressed rage. "My mother is right. It is too clean for the mess this family has become." I walked out of the salon with my head high, leaving the scent of lavender behind me, stepping back into the harsh reality of the street where I had nothing but my pride and a man who was worth more than all their platinum cards combined. The nights were the hardest part of living in the shell of a house. The drywall was exposed and the wind whistled through gaps in the window frames, but the real cold came from the empty side of the bed. For 2 weeks straight, Dante had not been home before 3 in the morning. When he finally stumbled through the door, his boots heavy on the plywood subfloor, he did not smell like sewage or plumbing glue. He smelled sharp and acrid. It was a mix of chlorine, sulfur, and something metallic like burnt ozone. I sat up on the air mattress, pulling the quilt tight around my shoulders to ward off the draft. "You are home late," I whispered, checking the time on my phone. It was nearly 4 in the morning. He did not look at me. He stripped off his coveralls, his movements heavy with a bone-deep exhaustion that frightened me. "Just a complicated job, Dom," he mumbled, keeping his back turned. "The filtration system is acting up. I have to get the calibration right before the inspection." Filtration system. That was his excuse every night. But what residential plumbing job required 16-hour days and left a man smelling like a chemical plant? He went straight to the small bathroom sink and began scrubbing his hands with a stiff brush. He scrubbed until his skin was red and raw, trying to wash away purple stains that looked like ink or dye. My phone buzzed on the crate we were using as a nightstand. The screen lit up the dark room. It was a text from my mother. She must have sensed my anxiety, or perhaps she had hired someone to watch us. Men who work with their hands usually have vices, Dominique. Her message read, "If he is not at a bar, he is at a poker table trying to win back the money he lost on that ring. Or worse. Do you really know where he goes at night?" Then a message from Bianca came through a minute later. "Saw a police cruiser near the industrial district tonight. Hope your hubby is not cooking anything illegal in a basement to pay for your wedding. That chemical smell does not wash out of clothes, sis." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. Bianca was cruel, but she was observant. The smell on Dante was chemical. It was undeniable. I looked at the man I was about to marry. He had collapsed onto the mattress, instantly asleep, still wearing his undershirt. Was he gambling? Was he desperate? We were bleeding money. The renovation was expensive. The wedding deposits were due. Maybe my father was right. Maybe the pressure was too much and he was looking for a quick fix. I reached out to touch his shoulder but pulled back. For the first time since we met, I was scared to ask him the truth because I was terrified of the answer. I lay awake until dawn listening to his breathing and wondering if I was sleeping next to a criminal or just a man drowning in debt he could not pay. The invitations were supposed to be my one small victory. Since we were paying for everything ourselves out of Dante's savings and my meager remaining paycheck, we decided to go simple. I chose handmade paper embedded with wildflower seeds. The idea was that guests could plant the invitation after the wedding and watch love grow. It was sustainable, it was sweet, and most importantly, it was affordable. I mailed them out on a Monday, feeling a flicker of hope that perhaps my extended family would see past the drama and appreciate the sentiment. 3 days later, my phone rang. It was Aunt Sarah. She was my godmother, the one person in the family who usually stayed neutral during my mother's tirades. I answered, expecting a warm RSVP. "Dominique, honey," she said, her voice stiff and cold. "I received your invitation today. Look, I know things are tight for you right now with the whole unemployment situation and the plumber fiancé, but really, darling, this is beneath even you." I froze. "What are you talking about, Aunt Sarah? We are serving a full dinner. We hired a farm-to-table catering company." There was a pause on the line, then a heavy sigh. "Do not lie to me, Dominique. It is printed right here on the card. I will send you a picture. But let me tell you right now, Uncle Bernard and I will not be attending. We do not do potlucks, especially not for weddings." Potlucks. I stared at my phone as the image came through. It was my invitation. The same wildflower paper, the same font. But at the bottom, in bold, ugly lettering, someone had added a sentence that made my stomach turn over. "Due to severe financial constraints, the couple requests that each guest bring a covered dish to share. Please bring your own beverages, as there will be no open bar." I felt the room spin. I had never written that. I would never write that. Someone had intercepted my mail, or worse, printed counterfeits. I opened Instagram, and the answer was staring me right in the face. Bianca had posted a story 10 minutes ago. She was holding the fake invitation up to the camera, her face twisted in a mock expression of pity. "You guys, I literally cannot breathe," she squealed. "My sister sent this to the whole family. She is asking us to bring casseroles to her wedding. I mean, I knew he was broke, but this is just sad. Who asked their guests to feed them? Just a reminder, my renewal party has an open bar and a seafood tower. No Tupperware required." The comments were brutal. People were tagging their friends, laughing at me, calling me trashy. My cousins were commenting things like hard pass and embarrassing. I sank to the floor amidst the construction dust of our unfinished living room. They had not just intercepted the invitations. Bianca had gone to the trouble of printing hundreds of fakes just to ensure that no one would show up. She wanted to paint me as a beggar. She wanted to make sure that anyone who was on the fence would choose her seafood tower over my potluck. Dante walked in and saw me crying. He took the phone from my hand and looked at the image. He did not get angry. He did not yell. He looked at the fake invitation and then at me with a calmness that was almost unnerving. "Let them believe it," he said, tossing the phone onto the couch. "Dante, they think we are destitute," I sobbed. "They think we are begging for food. No one is going to come." "Good," he said, kneeling down to wipe a tear from my cheek. "Think of it as a filtration system, Dom. We are filtering out the people who only show up for the free champagne. If they will not come to break bread with us because they think it is a potluck, then they do not deserve to sit at our table when we feast. Let them go to Bianca's. We only want the real ones." I looked at him and realized he was right. Bianca thought she was destroying my wedding. In reality, she was just curating the guest list. But as the decline notifications flooded my inbox, I couldn't help but wonder if there would be anyone left to filter. The sanctuary of my office at the Hope Initiative was the one place where I felt safe from the hurricane destroying my personal life. Here I was not the disappointment of the Williams family or the broke bride marrying a plumber. I was the director of outreach, a woman who secured funding for inner-city after-school programs. I was respected, or so I thought until Tuesday morning, when Mrs. Gable called me into her office and did not offer me a seat. Mrs. Gable was a woman who prided herself on compassion, but today her face was as hard as granite. She held a printed email in her hand. Her knuckles were white. "We lost the Whitmore grant," she stated flatly. $50,000, Dominique, gone. I felt the blood drain from my face. The Whitmore grant was my project. I had spent 6 months cultivating that relationship. It was a done deal. "What happened?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Did they change their philanthropic focus?" Mrs. Gable slid the email across her mahogany desk. It was from the Whitmore Foundation's financial advisor. I recognized the letterhead immediately. It was the investment firm where Brad worked. "They have been advised that the Hope Initiative has unstable leadership," Mrs. Gable said, her eyes boring into mine. "Specifically, they are concerned about the financial judgment of our director of outreach. They heard rumors about massive personal debt eviction and a certain wedding that has become the laughingstock of Atlanta." I stared at the paper. Brad had not just blocked my loans. He was using his position as a financial advisor to poison my professional reputation. He was telling his wealthy clients that I was a risk, essentially blacklisting the nonprofit as long as I was employed there. "It gets worse," Mrs. Gable continued, leaning back in her chair. "One of our board members received an invitation to your wedding, the one asking for covered dishes. She called me this morning asking if we pay you so little that you have to beg for food from your guests. She asked if you were embezzling funds to pay off your fiancé's gambling debts." The fake invitations. Bianca's cruel prank had crossed the line from social embarrassment to professional sabotage. "This is a misunderstanding, Mrs. Gable," I pleaded, feeling the walls closing in. "My family is trying to hurt me. That invitation was a forgery. My fiancé does not gamble." Mrs. Gable held up a hand, silencing me. "I do not care about your family drama, Dominique. I care about this organization. We operate on public trust. Right now you look like a liability. You look messy. And in this town, messy people do not get donations." She stood up, signaling the meeting was over. "Fix this, Dominique. Fix your image. Get your family under control, or get that plumber to pay off whatever debts are making you look this desperate. If we lose one more donor because of your personal circus, I will have to ask for your resignation. You have until the wedding to turn this around." I walked out of her office feeling like I was walking the plank. The cubicles outside were quiet. My co-workers were typing away, unaware that I was one email away from losing the career I had built for a decade. Brad and my parents were not just trying to stop the wedding, they were systematically dismantling every pillar of my independence until I had no choice but to crawl back to them. I went to the bathroom, locked the stall door, and pressed my forehead against the cold metal, trying to remember how to breathe. They wanted to starve me out. They wanted me broken. But as I wiped my eyes and looked in the mirror, I realized that if I quit now, everything Dante was working for would be in vain. I straightened my blazer. I would not let them win. I would not let them take my dignity along with my paycheck. The pepperoni pizza was cold, but I could not bring myself to eat another slice. In movies, the night before the wedding is filled with laughter and clinking champagne glasses. There are toasts from fathers who are trying not to cry, and mothers adjusting veils. There are sisters giggling about bridesmaid dresses. In our unfinished living room, the only sound was the hum of the portable generator and the rain tapping against the plywood boards covering the windows. I looked at my phone for the 100th time. It was 7 o'clock. The rehearsal dinner should have started an hour ago. I had sent the location to my parents just in case. I had sent it to Bianca too, hoping that maybe, just maybe, her cruelty was an act and she would show up when it mattered. The screen was black. No texts, no missed calls, no emojis. "They are not coming," I whispered the words, tasting like ash in my mouth. My parents were likely sitting at a steakhouse in Buckhead right now, toasting to Bianca's renewal. They were probably telling their friends that I had eloped or that the wedding was canceled due to lack of funds. They were erasing me. I looked around the room. Shadows danced on the exposed drywall. My wedding dress hung on a nail near the generator, covered in a plastic garment bag to protect it from the dust. It looked like a ghost. A sad, lonely ghost waiting for a party that would never happen. "I am so sorry, Dante," I said, my voice breaking. "I wanted to give you a family. I wanted us to be celebrated. Instead, I dragged you into this mess. You are marrying a woman with no dowry, no family, and a reputation that has been shredded by her own sister. You deserve better than a bride who cries over pizza in a construction zone." Dante set down his slice of pizza. He wiped his hands on a paper towel and reached across the crate to take my hand. His grip was firm, warm, and solid. It was the grip of a man who could hold up the world if he had to. "Stop it," he said, his voice low and intense. "Look at me, Dominique." I raised my tear-filled eyes to meet his. "Do you think I proposed to your father?" he asked. "Do you think I asked your sister to spend the rest of her life with me? I chose you, not them. You. I fell in love with the woman who spends her weekends helping kids read, not the woman whose last name gets her a table at Le Bilboquet." "But they are ruining it," I sobbed. "They made us look like beggars. I lost my job prospects. We are living in a shell. What kind of start is this?" "It is the best kind of start," Dante said, a small smile playing on his lips. "Because it is real. We are stripped down to the foundation, Dom. Just like this house. The rod is gone. The termites are gone. Now we build. And when you build on solid rock, nothing can tear you down." He stood up and pulled me into his arms. I buried my face in his chest, smelling the faint chemical scent of ozone and soap. It was a smell I had come to associate with his absence, but tonight it felt like safety. "I have a surprise for you," he whispered into my hair. "I have not been completely honest about what I have been doing these past few weeks. The late nights, the meetings, the smell." I pulled back slightly, fear flickering in my chest. "What do you mean?" "You trusted me when everyone called me a failure," he said, his eyes searching mine. "You stood by me when your family treated me like dirt. You loved the man in the coveralls. You never asked for proof of my worth." He kissed my forehead gently. "Tomorrow I need you to trust me one last time. When you walk down that aisle, do not look for the empty seats. Look at me. Because tomorrow everything changes. Tomorrow the world will see what I have built for you. And I promise you, Dominique, you will never have to bow your head to anyone in your family ever again." I looked at him, and for the first time in months, the knot of anxiety in my chest loosened. I did not know what he had done. I did not know what was coming. But looking at the fierce determination in his eyes, I believed him. We ate the rest of the cold pizza in silence, but it was no longer the silence of abandonment. It was the silence before a storm. The morning of my wedding did not begin with the pop of champagne corks or the nervous laughter of bridesmaids zipping up dresses. It began with the sound of a circular saw buzzing somewhere in the distance and the smell of fresh coffee brewing on a hot plate. I sat up on the air mattress, pulling the quilt around me. The sunlight was streaming through the gaps in the boarded windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. It was the quietest morning of my life. I reached for my phone on the overturned crate we used as a nightstand. On a day like this, a woman expects her screen to be flooded with well wishes, hearts, emojis, photos from cousins saying they are on their way. My screen was a blank void. There were no texts from my aunts, no missed calls from my college friends who had mysteriously become busy after Bianca's livestream. The silence was louder than any scream. It was a coordinated shunning, a final punishment for disobeying the family order. Then a single message bubbled up. It was from Vernice. I hesitated before opening it, my thumb hovering over the glass. Part of me, the little girl who just wanted her mother to tell her she looked pretty, still hoped for a miracle. Maybe she was apologizing. Maybe she was on her way. I tapped the screen. The message was short and cruel. It is not too late to turn back, daughter. The car is waiting outside. Leave him, and we can pretend this nightmare never happened. Just come home. I stared at the words. She did not care about my happiness. She did not care about Dante. She only cared about the narrative. She wanted to erase the last 6 months and reset me like a malfunctioning device. She wanted the obedient Dominique back, the one who would marry a banker and smile for the Christmas card. I looked across the room at my dress hanging on a nail. It was simple. It was cheap. But it was mine. I looked at Dante, who was outside loading the truck, whistling a tune I recognized from our first date. He was happy. He was free. And for the first time, I realized that going back to my mother would be the real nightmare. My thumb moved to the top right corner of the screen. I did not type a reply. I did not try to explain myself one last time. I pressed the information icon. I scrolled to the bottom in red letters. Block this caller. I pressed it. The message disappeared from my main screen. A weight I had been carrying for 32 years suddenly vanished from my shoulders. I got up and dressed myself in the silence. I did my own hair in the small bathroom mirror. I put on the dress that my mother had sneered at. When I opened the front door, the air was crisp and clean. Dante was waiting by the truck, not in his work clothes, but in a tuxedo that fit him perfectly. He held out his hand and I took it. I left my phone on the kitchen counter face down. I did not need it where we were going. Across town, the ballroom at the St. Regis was vibrating with the bass of a live band and the shrill sound of performative laughter. While Dante and I were driving down a quiet country road in his truck, my family was drowning in excess. The champagne flowed like water pouring from a magnum bottle into a tower of crystal coupes that reached toward the ceiling. Waiters in white tuxedos circled the room, offering trays of caviar and oysters, ensuring that no guest went without a taste of luxury for more than 30 seconds. My mother Vernice held court at the center table, looking like a queen who had just successfully executed a traitor. She sipped her drink and leaned in to whisper to my Aunt Sarah. "I am just so relieved you did not have to suffer through that other event," Vernice said, loud enough for the table to hear. "Can you imagine eating cold casserole in a construction zone? I heard she did not even have chairs. She probably expected everyone to sit on buckets." Aunt Sarah shuddered dramatically, clutching her pearls. "It is tragic, really, to think a Williams girl would fall so low. Thank God Bianca has standards. This is what a wedding should look like. Dignified, expensive." Bianca was twirling in the center of the dance floor in her custom Vera Wang gown. She was not dancing with her husband. She was dancing with her phone, recording a video for her followers. She panned the camera around the room, capturing the ice sculpture that was carved in the shape of her own silhouette. "Look at this turnout, you guys," she screamed over the music. "This is what happens when you are loved. No empty seats here." But the loudest voice in the room belonged to Brad. He was standing near the open bar, his face flushed with premium scotch and arrogance. He was surrounded by a group of my father's business associates, men who measured a man's worth by his portfolio. Brad was in his element. He loosened his tie and slapped my father on the back with a force that made Elijah stumble slightly. "You have to spend money to make money, gentlemen," Brad shouted, gesturing grandly to the room. "This party cost me $100,000 and I did not even blink. I just closed a massive position in tech futures this morning. We are talking 7 figures. The bank is going to name a conference room after me when they see my quarterly numbers." My father Elijah beamed at him, looking at Brad with the pride he had never once shown me. "That is my boy," Elijah said, raising his glass. "To success. And to knowing the difference between an asset and a liability." Brad laughed, clinking his glass against my father's. "To shedding dead weight," he toasted. The group erupted in laughter. They drank the scotch and ate the caviar, completely unaware of the reality beneath their feet. They did not know that the massive position Brad was bragging about was not a trade, it was a transfer. A transfer from client accounts into his personal offshore shell company. They did not know that the money paying for the ice sculpture and the band was stolen. They thought they were the kings of Atlanta, celebrating their superiority. They had no idea they were dancing on the edge of a cliff, and the ground was already beginning to crumble. The garden behind the unfinished house had been transformed. Dante had cleared the kudzu and built rows of benches from reclaimed cedar wood. Garlands of white wildflowers hung from the old oak trees, and soft solar lights twinkled in the late afternoon shadows. It was the most romantic setting I had ever seen. It was also heartbreakingly empty. We had set up chairs for 100 people. My optimistic heart had believed that when push came to shove, family would choose love over pride. I was wrong. 80 chairs sat vacant, staring back at me like wooden tombstones. There was no sea of familiar faces, no cousins recording videos, no mother dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief. There was just the wind rustling the leaves and the quiet strumming of a lone acoustic guitar player. I stood at the back of the aisle, clutching my bouquet of hand-picked daisies so tight the stems began to snap. I was walking alone. My father Elijah was probably at the St. Regis right now, raising a glass to Brad and laughing about how he had dodged a bullet. The shame was a physical weight on my chest, heavy and suffocating. I took the first step and tears blurred my vision. I felt small. I felt like the little girl who was never quite good enough for the Williams dynasty. But as I walked past the first row of empty benches, I finally looked at the people who had shown up. There were only about 20 of them. I expected to see Dante's drinking buddies or maybe some guys from the bowling league. I expected rough hands and loud voices. Instead, I saw a collection of people who radiated a quiet, terrifying kind of intelligence. In the front row sat a man with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses, wearing a tweed suit that looked older than me but was impeccably tailored. He nodded at me with a grave respect. Next to him was a woman with sharp eyes and a posture of steel, wearing a simple navy blazer. These people did not look like plumbers. They looked like the people whose names appeared on university buildings or patent filings. Dante did not wait for me at the altar. When he saw me falter halfway down the aisle, he broke protocol. He stepped down from the platform and walked toward me, his tuxedo sharp against the rustic backdrop. He took my hand in front of everyone, and the few guests stood up. They did not stand out of obligation. They stood with a reverence that confused me. "Who are these people?" I whispered to Dante as he tucked my arm through his. Dante smiled, looking at the silver-haired man. "That is Dr. Eris Thorne, Dean of Civil Engineering at Georgia Tech. And the woman next to him is Sarah Jenkins. She runs the National Water Sanitation Union. They are my mentors, Dom. And today, they are our family." I looked back at the small crowd. I saw chief engineers. I saw environmental scientists. I saw men and women who built the infrastructure of this country. They were not here for free shrimp or open bars. They were here because they respected the man standing next to me. For the first time that day, the 80 empty chairs did not matter. My family had chosen to sit with influencers and bank fraudsters. I was standing with the architects of the future. I squeezed Dante's hand and lifted my chin. I was ready to marry the plumber. Just as the officiant cleared his throat to begin the ceremony, a low rumble vibrated through the soles of my shoes. It sounded like thunder, but the sky above was a piercing cloudless blue. I turned my head toward the gravel driveway, expecting to see another guest arriving late, or perhaps the police coming to shut us down for a zoning violation. Instead, a massive black truck emblazoned with a silver satellite dish on its roof rolled slowly onto the property. It was followed by two sleek SUVs with tinted windows. This was not a local news van looking for a cat stuck in a tree. This looked like a motorcade for a head of state. The vehicles came to a halt, and doors flew open in perfect synchronization. Men and women dressed in black tactical gear with headsets jumped out. They weren't carrying weapons, they were carrying cameras. Not iPhone cameras for a live stream, but massive cinema-grade rigs that looked like they belonged on a Hollywood set. I gripped Dante's arm so hard I felt his muscles tense under his tuxedo jacket. "What is going on?" I hissed, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Is this Brad? Did he send the media to humiliate us? To broadcast our poverty to the world?" Dante covered my hand with his. His pulse was steady. "Just breathe, Dom. It is okay." A woman with a clipboard and a headset walked briskly toward the altar. She didn't look at the empty chairs. She didn't look at the unfinished house. She looked at the lighting. She looked at the angles. She signaled to a cameraman who immediately hoisted a rig onto his shoulder and pointed a lens the size of a dinner plate directly at us. "Excuse me," I said, stepping forward, my voice shaking. "This is a private ceremony. You cannot be here. Please leave." The woman stopped and looked at me. Her expression softened. She didn't look at me with pity or disdain. She looked at me with a kind of awe. "Mrs. Williams," she said, her voice respectful and professional. "I am Sarah, the lead director for the American Innovators series. We have been following Dante's work on the Aqua Pure project for 6 months. We have footage of him in the lab, footage of him in the tunnels, and footage of the breakthrough. But we needed this. Needed what I asked, bewildered. The heart of the story," she smiled, gesturing to the small gathering of scientists and engineers. "We are not here to intrude. We are here to document history. The world knows Dante the inventor. We want them to see Dante the man, and the woman who stood by him when no one else would." I looked at Dante. He wasn't looking at the cameras. He was looking at me. "I told them they could come," he whispered. "I wanted a record, Dom, not for vanity, but because I wanted proof. 10 years from now, when we are old and gray, I want our children to see this day. I want them to see that while your family was busy chasing likes on Instagram, we were busy making history." The director raised her hand. "We are rolling," she said quietly. "Just pretend we are not here. Focus on each other." I looked back at the lens. For months I had hidden from cameras, terrified of Bianca's mockery. But now, facing a broadcast rig that would beam this image to millions, I felt a strange surge of power. Let them film. Let Brad see this in high definition. Let my mother see that her absence didn't stop the show. It just made the spotlight shine brighter on the people who actually mattered. The officiant, a soft-spoken man who had baptized Dante as a child, asked us to join hands. Dante's palms were warm and steady against mine. He did not pull a piece of paper from his pocket. He did not need cheat sheets for what he was about to say. He looked directly into my eyes, ignoring the massive camera lens hovering just over my shoulder, and the empty benches that had haunted me only minutes ago. "Dominique," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the garden without the need for a microphone. "For the past 10 years I have spent my life working in the dark. I work in the tunnels and the pipes that people pretend do not exist. I deal with the waste, the refuse, and the things society wants to flush away and forget." He paused, and I felt a hush fall over the small congregation of scientists and engineers. Even the camera crew seemed to hold their breath. People look at my hands and they see dirt. Dante continued gently running his thumb over my knuckles. They look at my clothes and see a mess. But an engineer knows that the most important work happens in the filtration. My life's work is not about the dirt, Dominique. It is about the separation. It is about stripping away the toxins, the pollutants, and the contaminants to reveal the pure, clear water that was there all along. A tear escaped my eye, tracking hot down my cheek. I knew he wasn't talking about water anymore. "I have watched you for 3 years," Dante said, his voice thickening with emotion. "I have watched people try to pollute you. I have watched them pour their insecurity, their greed, and their cruelty into your spirit, hoping to turn you murky so they wouldn't have to face their own reflection. They tried to tell you that you were worthless because you didn't sparkle with diamonds. But they didn't understand the chemistry of a soul like yours." He squeezed my hands tighter, anchoring me as my knees began to tremble. "You remained pure," he whispered. "No matter how much toxicity they dumped on you, you remained kind. You remained generous. You remained you. And that is why I am standing here today. Not to save you. You do not need saving. I am standing here to be your filter. I promise you from this day forward I will be the barrier between you and the sludge of the world. I will block out the noise, the judgment, and the shallow expectations. I will strip away anything that tries to dim your light. We are going to build a life that is clean, Dominique. A life that is honest. Let them keep their gold-plated faucets. I would rather have the pure water that flows through them. And with you I have found the purest thing on earth." The dam inside me finally broke. It wasn't a polite, silent cry. It was a sob that wrenched itself from the bottom of my chest, a release of 32 years of pain. I realized in that moment that the empty chairs behind me weren't a punishment. They were the first act of filtration. Dante had not just married me, he had cleaned my life. The toxins were gone. The pollutants were at the St. Regis drinking champagne. And I was standing in the garden, finally clean. I nodded, unable to speak, and the small crowd of geniuses stood up and applauded, not with polite golf claps, but with the thunderous approval of people who recognized a breakthrough when they saw one. The sun began to dip below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the reclaimed wood tables. I had expected paper plates and plastic forks. I had expected the humiliating potluck my sister had mocked. Instead, the air was filled with an aroma so complex and rich, it made my mouth water instantly. It smelt of truffle saffron and wood-fired earth. A man in a pristine white chef's coat but no hat walked over to our table. He carried a large rustic platter. I recognized him immediately. It was Chef Marco, the head of the only 3 Michelin star restaurant in Atlanta. A man whose waiting list was 6 months long. Dante stood up and hugged him. "Marco. Good to see you, my friend." Chef Marco beamed, placing the platter down. "For you, Dante, only the best. This is wild boar ragu hunted this morning in the Blue Ridge Mountains, served with hand-rolled pappardelle and a 20-year-old balsamic glaze. No charge. Consider it a wedding gift for the man who fixed my restaurant's water filtration system when the city couldn't figure it out." I stared at the food. This was not a catered meal. This was a private dining experience that billionaires couldn't buy. My family was eating shrimp cocktail at the St. Regis while we were eating art prepared by a culinary legend. As the wine began to flow, a vintage red brought by the Dean of Engineering, the conversation shifted. I sat quietly listening to the hum of voices around me. I expected them to talk about sports or the weather. Instead, the air was thick with words I barely understood. "So Dante," Dr. Thorne said, cutting into his bore. "The patent filing for the membrane technology. I saw it went through last Tuesday. Congratulations. That is a game changer for the Sub-Saharan Infrastructure Project." Dante nodded, taking a sip of wine. It was tight for a minute there. We had to prove the durability testing exceeded federal standards by 300%. But yes, we are greenlit for production in Kenya next month. Sarah, the union leader, leaned in. The contract value is public now, right? I heard rumors it capped at 80 million for the initial phase. Dante shrugged casually, as if discussing the price of milk. 85, actually, plus royalties on the filtration units. But the money is secondary. The important thing is that it will provide clean water to 4 million people. I dropped my fork. It clattered loudly against the ceramic plate. 85 million. I looked at Dante. He was wiping sauce from his lip, looking completely at ease. This was the man who drove a 10-year-old truck. The man my mother called a peasant. The man who let my sister humiliated him over a $2,000 wine bill. Dante. I whispered, my voice trembling. What are they talking about? What patent? Dante turned to me and smiled the same crooked smile I fell in love with. He reached under the table and squeezed my knee. We will talk about the details later, Dom. Tonight, just eat. Tonight, we celebrate the fact that while your family is chasing status, we are chasing solutions. I looked around the table again. These weren't just guests. They were partners. They were witnesses to a greatness I had lived beside, but never truly seen. I picked up my fork, my hand shaking slightly. I took a bite of the wild boar. It tasted like victory. The last of the guests had departed, leaving only the soft glow of the solar lights and the hum of the cicadas in the Georgia heat. I was exhausted, but it was a good exhaustion, the kind that comes from laughing until your ribs ache and eating food that nourishes your soul. I looked at Dante, expecting him to lead me back to the unfinished house. I was ready to collapse onto our air mattress and sleep for a week. But Dante did not turn toward the porch. He took my hand and led me deeper into the property toward the large open field that my sister had called a mosquito-infested swamp. Where are we going? I asked, kicking off my heels and walking barefoot on the grass. The generator is back at the house. Dante checked his watch. We are not staying here tonight, Dom. The paint fumes are bad for your lungs. I booked us a hotel. I stopped walking. A hotel? Dante, we cannot afford a hotel, especially not after you paid for all this food and wine. I am fine with the air mattress, really. Dante didn't answer. He just pointed toward the dark horizon. Listen, he said. At first I thought it was thunder again, a low rhythmic thumping that seemed to vibrate in my chest. But the sky was clear and filled with stars. The sound grew louder, shifting from a rumble to a distinct mechanical chopping noise that whipped the wind around us. The trees at the edge of the clearing began to sway violently. My hair whipped across my face. Suddenly, a spotlight cut through the darkness from above. I shielded my eyes as a sleek black shape descended from the sky. It was not a news helicopter. It was a private Bell 429 luxury chopper, the kind I had only seen in movies about billionaires or heads of state. It touched down on the grass, with a grace that defied its size, the rotors slowing to a gentle whir. I stood frozen, my mouth agape. The side door opened, and a pilot in a crisp uniform stepped out and nodded to Dante. "Ready for departure, Mr. Williams," the pilot shouted over the noise. I looked from the helicopter to Dante. My brain could not process what I was seeing. This was the man who counted coupons for pipe fittings. This was the man who drove a truck with a dented bumper. Dante. I shouted, my voice lost in the wind. Who is paying for this? Is this a medical evac? Is someone hurt? Dante laughed, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. He pulled me close, his tuxedo jacket fluttering in the rotor wash. He leaned down to my ear. No one is hurt, Dom. This is our ride. But it is a helicopter, I stammered, pointing at the multi-million-dollar machine. Dante winked, and the mischievous glint in his eye returned. It is a company vehicle, he said, grinning. Consider it the plumber's truck. It just helps me get to the leaks faster. He helped me into the cabin, which smelled of rich leather and success. As we lifted off the ground, I looked down. The unfinished house became a small speck. The city of Atlanta spread out before us, a grid of golden lights. Somewhere down there in one of those glittering buildings, my family was likely drunk and loud, bragging about money they didn't have. And here I was, soaring above them, in the silent luxury of the truth, leaving the noise and the lies far below in the dirt, where they belonged. 2 weeks later, the air in Bianca's living room was thick with the smell of expensive perfume and desperation. My sister had invited 50 people to her global premiere party, but only the family and a few hangers-on had shown up. It didn't matter to her. She was convinced that tonight she would become a household name. She had told everyone that the camera crew at my wedding was actually there to film her reaction to my tragedy. She had spun a narrative in her head where she was the sympathetic protagonist dealing with a train wreck of a sister. She paced in front of the 80-inch television screen, holding a glass of champagne that she hadn't taken a sip of in an hour. "This is it, you guys," she squealed, adjusting her sequins. "My producer contact said the segment airs right after the commercial break. They are going to love me, I just know it. I'm going to be the breakout star of Atlanta." My mother Vernice sat on the white leather sofa beaming with pride. She looked at Bianca like she was looking at a winning lottery ticket. Finally, some recognition, she said loud enough for the room to hear. "After the embarrassment of that disaster in the woods, we need to remind this city what the Williams family really stands for: class, elegance, star power." But in the corner of the room, sitting in a shadow cast by a large potted palm, Brad was not celebrating. He was sweating. He kept checking his phone every 30 seconds, his thumbs scrolling frantically through emails that I guessed were not congratulations. I watched him from the doorway of my memory, imagining the scene perfectly. Brad loosened his tie. His hand shook as he lifted a glass of scotch to his lips. He wasn't looking at the TV. He was looking at a message from the bank's internal audit department. "Urgent discrepancies found in Q3 allocation. Meeting required immediately." "Are you okay, son, my father?" Elijah asked, clapping a hand on Brad's shoulder. "You look like you have seen a ghost. Relax. Tonight we celebrate. Bianca is going to make us famous." Brad jumped, spilling amber liquid onto the carpet. He forced a smile that looked more like a grimace of pain. "I am fine, Elijah. Just work stress. The market is volatile, you know." He was lying. The market was fine. His career was the thing that was volatile. He knew that the money he had spent on the renewal party, the money he had used to block my loans, it was all leaving a paper trail. And unlike Dante, who built systems to purify, Brad had built a life on sludge that was about to back up. Bianca clapped her hands, silencing the room. "It is starting. Everyone shut up. The intro is playing." The room went silent. All eyes turned to the massive screen. The grandiose music of a prime-time special began to play. Brad downed the rest of his drink in one gulp, looking like a man facing a firing squad. They thought they were about to see a reality show about housewives. They had no idea they were tuning into a documentary about their own destruction. The Williams family leaned in, ready to be worshipped, completely unaware that the god on the screen was not the one they prayed to. 5, 4, 3, 2. Bianca screamed, pointing her remote at the screen like a weapon. She had rehearsed this moment for months. She expected to see her own face in high definition, crying about her sister's tragic wedding. She expected the opening credits of Rich Wives of Atlanta to roll with her name in gold letters. Instead, the screen went black. The upbeat pop music cut out instantly, replaced by the deep resonant thrum of a cello. The room fell silent. The guests holding their champagne flutes lowered them confused. "What is going on?" Bianca shrieked, hitting the remote against her palm. "The signal is down. Brad fixed the Wi-Fi. They are missing my debut." But it was not a technical glitch. A new image faded into view. It was stark cinematic and incredibly expensive. An aerial shot of the Hoover Dam appeared, followed by a time-lapse of a massive water treatment facility rising from the earth in Kenya. The production value was Hollywood level. A deep, authoritative voiceover boomed through the surround sound speakers, shaking the floorboards. In a world running dry, one man saw the future in a single drop. The words "American Titans" flashed across the screen in burnished steel letters. "What is this, my mother?" Vernice asked, squinting. "Is this a documentary? Why is this airing during prime time? Change the channel, Bianca. I want to see you." "I cannot," Bianca yelled, pressing buttons frantically. "It is a network takeover. It is on every channel." Then the screen shifted again. A sleek, modern logo animated into the center of the frame. It was a stylized blue water drop encased in a steel gear. Beneath it, the words appeared in bold, unignorable font: Dante Infrastructure Global Solutions. In the corner, Brad made a noise that sounded like a dying animal. He dropped his glass. It shattered on the hardwood floor, but no one looked. Brad was staring at the logo with eyes wide with terror. He knew that logo. He had seen it on the Bloomberg terminal at his office. He had seen it in the headlines of the Wall Street Journal. He just hadn't put the pieces together until this exact second. Dante Infrastructure. My father. Elijah read aloud, laughing nervously. That is a funny coincidence. That is the plumber's name. Maybe he works for them. Maybe he is unclogging their toilets. No, Brad whispered, his face draining of all color. He does not work for them, Elijah. The camera on the screen pushed in on a man standing on a suspended walkway high above a roaring turbine. The man turned around. He wasn't wearing a hard hat or coveralls. He was wearing a bespoke Italian suit. He looked powerful. He looked dangerous. He looked like a king. It was Dante. "He is them," Brad choked out, loosening his tie as if it were a noose. "That is the holding company that just acquired my bank's parent corporation this morning. That is the new owner." Bianca stopped screaming. Vernice stopped drinking. The room went deadly quiet save for the voice on the television introducing the man of the hour. The television screen dissolved from the imposing steel logo into a wide shot of a command center that looked more like NASA headquarters than a corporate boardroom. Walls of glass overlooked a bustling floor of engineers and analysts. In the center of the frame, standing in front of a massive digital map of Georgia, stood Dante. He was wearing a charcoal three-piece suit that fit him with military precision. His hair was groomed, his posture commanding. He held a laser pointer directing attention to a complex web of blue arteries pulsing across the state map. He did not look like the man who had silently eaten cold pizza in a construction zone. He looked like a titan of industry. "The current infrastructure of the Southeast is critical," Dante said to the camera, his voice resonant and authoritative. "We are not just patching leaks anymore. We are rewriting the hydraulic circulatory system of the entire state. This map represents a $2 billion overhaul of the residential grid. Every drop of water in Atlanta will pass through our filtration membranes by next year." Elijah squinted at the screen, his face twisting in confusion. He leaned forward until his nose was inches from the display. "That is a deep fake," he muttered, shaking his head violently. "It has to be AI generated. That grease monkey cannot pronounce hydraulic circulatory system. He barely finished high school. I hired a private investigator who told me he was a manual laborer." The documentary narrator's voice cut through Elijah's denial. "Meet Dante Williams, the phantom billionaire, the genius who turned a single filtration patent into a global infrastructure empire. While others in Atlanta sought fame and flash, Dante sought solutions in the dark. His net worth is currently estimated at $4 billion, making him the largest private holder of utility contracts in the country. $4 billion. The number hung in the air like toxic smoke, suffocating every person in the room. Bianca stood frozen in the middle of the room. Her mouth was slightly open. Her hand, which had been clutching her crystal champagne flute so tightly her knuckles were white, suddenly went limp. The glass fell. It hit the hardwood floor with a shatter that sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. Expensive champagne splashed onto the hem of her custom gown, but she did not flinch. She did not even look down. "That is the plumber," she whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of horror and disbelief. She pointed a shaking finger at the screen where Dante was now shaking hands with the governor of Georgia. "That is the guy I mocked!" she screamed, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. "That is the guy I told to use the service entrance. That is the guy I laughed at for paying a $2,000 wine bill with cash. He has $4 billion. Brad was sitting on the floor now, his back against the wall. He looked like he was going to vomit. He was not looking at the screen. He was staring at his hands, realizing the gravity of his mistake. "He played us," Brad croaked. "He played us all. He did not just fix pipes, Elijah. He bought the supply." On the screen, the interviewer asked Dante a question. "Mr. Williams, you are known for your extreme privacy. Why did you choose to live in anonymity for so long while building this empire?" TV. Dante smiled. It was the same calm, secret smile he had given me in the garden. He looked directly into the camera lens. It felt like he was staring right into Bianca's living room, piercing through the screen and looking into their souls. "Because I wanted to see who would offer me a seat at the table when I had nothing to bring but myself," Dante said softly. "It turns out the table was empty, so I decided to buy the restaurant instead." Bianca sank to her knees amidst the broken glass and spilled wine, staring at the man she had called a rat, finally realizing that she was the one living in the sewer. The television screen shifted again, replacing Dante's face with a complex three-dimensional graph that was climbing steeply toward the top right corner of the frame. The documentary host walked into the shot, his tone shifting from admiration to cold, hard financial analysis. To the average viewer, these were just lines on a chart. To the people in Bianca's living room who measured their self-worth in decimal points, these lines were a death sentence. "Let us break down the valuation," the host said, pointing to a spike in the graph labeled Q1. While Williams Industries has a diverse portfolio, the crown jewel is the Aqua Pure patent. This single piece of intellectual property, which filters heavy metals at a molecular level without electricity, has disrupted the global sanitation market. The screen flashed a number in bold white font against a black background. $400 million. The host paused, letting the number burn into the retinas of the audience. "That is $400 million not in total valuation, but in annual licensing fees alone," the host clarified. "This is the passive income generated by just one of Mr. Williams's 18 active patents. To put that in perspective, that is more than the GDP of some small island nations." And unlike most tech giants who dilute their shares with investors, Dante Williams retained 100% equity. He answers to no board. He pays no dividends. Every cent flows directly back into his control. In the living room, the silence was broken by a sound that was terrifyingly human. It was the sound of air refusing to enter lungs. Vernice was clutching the arm of the white leather sofa so hard that her manicured nails had punctured the material. Her face, usually a mask of composed haughtiness, had turned a sickly shade of gray. She opened her mouth to speak, but only a dry, raspy wheeze came out. Her hand flew to her throat, fingering the diamond necklace that suddenly felt like a tightening noose. $400 million, she gasped, her eyes rolling back slightly. A year, cash. She looked at Bianca, who was still on the floor. She looked at the spilled champagne. She looked at the luxury renewal party that had cost them $100,000 of borrowed money. It all looked like garbage now. She had kicked a man out of her house who earned more in a week than her husband had earned in his entire life. She had threatened to disinherit a daughter who was now sleeping next to an economy of scale. Elijah was not gasping. He was catatonic. He stood in the center of the room, his eyes locked on the screen, blinking slowly like a machine that had short-circuited. He was running the numbers in his head over and over again, hoping to find a flaw, hoping to find a decimal error. "I bought the building," Elijah whispered to no one. "I spent 200 grand to buy that apartment building. I evicted him. I threw his clothes in the rain. He began to laugh, a low, unhinged sound that made the guests back away. He could have bought the whole zip code, Elijah said, his voice rising. He let me play landlord while he owned the city. He stood there in his coveralls and let me lecture him about ambition. On the screen, the documentary continued mercilessly, showing a montage of Dante's philanthropic work, building wells and developing nations. Vernice slumped sideways on the couch, her breathing shallow and rapid. My chest, she moaned. I can't. The numbers. I can't breathe. Brad looked up from the floor, his face wet with sweat. She is having a panic attack, Elijah. Do something. Elijah didn't move. He couldn't take his eyes off the ticker tape running at the bottom of the screen. It listed the subsidiaries of Dante's company. One of them was the bank that held the mortgage on Elijah's house. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. They hadn't just lost a son-in-law. They were currently living in a house that, through a web of corporate acquisitions, effectively belonged to the plumber. The documentary shifted gears seamlessly, moving from the cold, angular graphics of financial dominance to a soft, cinematic glow. The aggressive electronic soundtrack faded, replaced by the gentle acoustic strumming of a guitar. On the massive screen in Bianca's living room, the image of the unfinished house appeared, but it was no longer a symbol of poverty. Through the lens of the high-definition cameras, it looked like a sanctuary. It looked like the birthplace of something holy. The narrator's voice lost its corporate edge and became rich with storytelling reverence. But a king needs a queen, the voice intoned. And while Dante Williams could have chosen any supermodel or heiress in the world, he chose the one woman who saw him when he was invisible. The screen filled with a close-up of my face from the ceremony. I was not wearing diamonds. My hair was windblown. I looked tired, but my eyes were locked on Dante with a ferocity that burned through the pixels. Dominique Williams, the narrator, continued. A woman who was given an ultimatum by her wealthy family: choose the fortune or choose the plumber. She chose the plumber. She walked away from millions to live in a construction zone because she believed in the man, not the bank account. In the living room, the silence was absolute. Even Vernice's gasping had quieted into a horrified stillness. They were watching their own villainy broadcast to 50 million households. Then came the shot that destroyed them. The camera on the screen pulled back slowly from the altar. It widened the frame to reveal the setting. It showed the small group of scientists on the right side. And then, with brutal, deliberate slowness, it panned to the left, the bride's side. The camera lingered on the rows of empty wooden benches. It zoomed in on the vacant seats where a mother, a father, and a sister should have been. The sunlight hit the dust motes dancing over the empty wood, highlighting the void. While the groom's colleagues, the greatest minds in engineering, gathered to witness history, the bride stood alone, the narrator said, his voice dripping with judgment. Her family refused to attend. They believed the wedding was beneath them. They left their daughter to walk down the aisle by herself because they could not bear the shame of associating with the working class. A chyron appeared at the bottom of the screen displaying live social media reactions. The tweets scrolled by faster than the eye could read, but key phrases jumped out. Who does that to their daughter? Her family are monsters. Karma is going to hit them hard. Dominique is a legend. Her parents are trash. Bianca fell back against the wall, sliding down until she hit the floor. She was scrolling through her own Instagram feed on her phone. Her comment section, usually filled with praise from bots and sycophants, was exploding with hate. They are dragging us, she whispered, her voice hollow. I am losing 1,000 followers a second. People are canceling me. They are calling us the worst family in America. On the screen, the TV version of Dante took my hand. The camera focused on our interlaced fingers. She is the only investor who bought in when the stock was at zero, the narrator concluded. And now she is the only shareholder that matters. The Williams family wanted to avoid embarrassment. Instead, they have immortalized their own cruelty. The segment faded to black, leaving the image of the empty chairs burned into the retina of every person in the room. My father Elijah sat with his mouth open, staring at the blank space where his reputation used to be. He realized then that money could be recovered, but this was permanent. They hadn't just lost the money, they had lost the narrative. And in their world, the narrative was everything. The documentary cut to a stark studio setting with a black backdrop and a single spotlight illuminating Dante's face. He sat in a leather chair, relaxed and composed, holding a glass of water. The interviewer, a legendary journalist known for breaking the toughest subjects, leaned in with a notepad on his knee. The contrast between the intimate quiet of the interview and the chaos in Bianca's living room was jarring. "You spent 6 months dating Dominique while posing as a plumber," the interviewer asked, his voice echoing in the silent room. "You let her family ridicule you. You let them humiliate you in public. Why endure that when you could have bought the restaurant they were eating in?" Dante took a sip of water. He looked thoughtful, not vindictive. "Because I needed to know the data," he said calmly. "In engineering, we stress test materials. We apply pressure to see where the cracks form. I needed to know if the people around me were solid concrete or just painted drywall." The camera zoomed in slowly on his face. "And what did you find?" the interviewer asked. "I found that my wife is made of steel," Dante answered, a softness entering his eyes. "And I found that her family is made of papier-mâché. Pretty to look at, but they dissolve the moment it rains." In the living room, Vernice made a sound like a wounded animal. She brought a hand to her chest, clutching the silk of her blouse. "He is talking about us," she whispered. "He is humiliating us on national television." The interviewer pressed on. "But surely, Mr. Williams, their absence at your wedding must have stung. They are your wife's blood. To have 80 empty seats." Dante interrupted him with a small dismissive wave of his hand. "It did not sting," he said. "Actually, I owe them a debt of gratitude." Elijah looked up from the floor, his eyes bloodshot. "Gratitude? Is he mocking us?" "There are people in this world," Dante continued, looking directly into the lens, "who believe that human value is stitched into the label of a suit. They think character is determined by the credit limit on a platinum card. They look at a man with dirt on his hands and see trash. They look at a bank account and see a god." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his expression turning lethal. "If those people had attended my wedding, they would have brought their toxicity with them. They would have judged the food, the chairs, the grass itself. By refusing to come, they did me the greatest favor of all. They ensured that the air in that garden remained clean. They filtered themselves out so that we could breathe. So yes, I thank them. They stayed in their bubble and kept my sanctuary unpolluted." The words hit Vernice like a physical slap. She recoiled, her head snapping back against the sofa cushion. She who had called him dirty, she who had called him a sewer rat. He had just told the world that she was the pollution. He had framed her absence not as a power move, but as a successful sanitation procedure. The phone on the coffee table began to ring. It was not a text. It was a call from the chairwoman of the charity board Vernice sat on. Then another call from the country club membership committee. The red notifications began to pile up on the lock screen. "They are dropping us," Bianca whispered, staring at the phone. "They are all watching. They know he is talking about us." Dante's face on the screen remained calm, serene, and utterly victorious. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't used a single curse word. He had simply told the truth. And in doing so, he had dismantled the Williams family reputation more effectively than any lawsuit ever could. He had turned their snobbery into a badge of shame, and the entire country was applauding him for it. The water of the Indian Ocean was a shade of turquoise that looked almost artificial, like blue Gatorade poured over white sand. I sat on the edge of the deck of our private overwater bungalow, my feet dangling just inches above the gentle waves. Dante was snorkeling a few yards out, his back glistening in the equatorial sun. It had been 3 days since we left Atlanta. 3 days of silence, 3 days of no yelling, no judgment, and no reception. I had promised Dante I would do a digital detox. I locked my phone in the room safe the moment we arrived. But as I watched a small crab scuttle across the wooden planks, a gnawing curiosity took hold of me. I knew the documentary had aired. I knew the bomb had dropped. And I needed to see the crater. I walked back into the air-conditioned bedroom and punched the code into the safe. The heavy metal door swung open, revealing my iPhone lying there like a dormant grenade. I took a deep breath and held the side button. The Apple logo appeared white and innocent. The moment the device connected to the villa's high-speed Wi-Fi, it began to convulse in my hand. It vibrated so violently, I almost dropped it. The screen became a blur of banners and badges. The notification sounds merged into a single continuous electronic scream. 138 missed calls, 412 text messages, 99 plus notifications on Instagram. I scrolled through the call log. It was a list of people who had deleted my number a week ago. My Aunt Sarah, my college roommate, my cousin who had laughed at the potluck rumor. And at the very top, appearing 40 times in the last hour, was my mother Vernice. I opened the messages. The most recent one from her stopped my heart. It was not an apology. It was not a plea for forgiveness. It was something far more sinister. It was a rewrite of history. Dominique honey, please pick up. The text read, I know you were just teasing us with all this secrecy. You really got us good. We are all laughing about it now. Daddy and I are so proud of Dante. We always knew he was special. Come home, baby. Mommy misses you. We need to plan a proper celebration dinner. I felt a wave of nausea rise in my throat. Mommy. She hadn't called herself that since I was 5 years old. She was gaslighting me through a text message. She was pretending that the eviction, the cruelty, the insults, and the public humiliation were just a tease. She was trying to frame their abuse as a misunderstanding. She wasn't missing her daughter. She was missing the proximity to $4 billion. She was terrified that the world saw her for what she was, and she needed a photo op with me to prove she wasn't a monster. I scrolled down. Below her sugary lies were messages from Brad. These were not manipulative, they were frantic. Dom, you have to answer. The auditors are here. They are looking at the trust fund transfers. Tell Dante to call off the dogs. I am looking at federal time, Dom. Please, I'm family. I looked out at the ocean where Dante was now climbing up the ladder, removing his mask. He shook his wet hair like a dog and smiled at me, a smile of pure, unburdened happiness. He saw the phone in my hand and the look of disgust on my face. Everything okay? He asked, grabbing a towel. I looked at the screen one last time. I looked at the desperate clawing attempts of people who had tried to drown me, realizing that I was the one on the boat and they were the ones treading water. My mother says she misses me, I said, my voice flat. She says she knows I was just joking. Dante laughed, a rich, deep sound that carried over the water. That is funny, he said, walking over and kissing my temple. Because I wasn't joking. I didn't reply to my mother. I didn't reply to Brad. I walked to the edge of the deck and held the phone out over the water. I watched it slip from my fingers, splashing into the turquoise sea, sinking down to the coral reef below. The vibrations stopped. The silence returned. I turned back to my husband, and for the first time in my life, I was truly unreachable. The documentary on the television cut to a commercial break, but nobody in the room moved to mute it. The silence in Bianca's living room was heavy, pressurized by the impending doom that hung over them like a guillotine blade. Brad was sitting on the floor, his back against the wall, staring at the black mirror of his phone. He looked like a man waiting for a medical diagnosis he already knew was terminal. Then the phone rang. It wasn't a text or an email notification. It was the sharp, demanding ringtone assigned to only one contact, Reginald Sterling, the CEO of First Liberty Financial. The sound cut through the room, making Vernice jump. Brad stared at the screen. His hand refused to move. Answer it, Elijah hissed, sweat beading on his forehead. Maybe it is a mistake. Maybe they just want to ask about the merger. Brad shook his head slowly. He knew better. He reached out with a trembling hand and tapped the green icon. He put the phone to his ear, but he didn't speak. He didn't have to. Mr. Sterling's voice was loud enough to be heard by everyone in the hushed room. It wasn't the friendly golfing buddy tone Brad was used to. It was cold-clipped and official. Bradley the voice barked. I am calling to inform you that your security clearance has been revoked effective immediately. Do not come into the office tomorrow. Security has been instructed to escort you off the premises if you attempt to enter the building. Brad's throat clicked as he tried to swallow. Reggie, please. I can explain. The accounts were just... Save it for the feds, Sterling interrupted. We just finished a preliminary meeting with the new ownership group. They handed us a file, Brad. A very thick, very detailed file. It documents every unauthorized transfer, every falsified loan rejection, and every penny you siphoned into that shell company for your wife's party. Brad's eyes darted to the television screen. The commercial had ended, and the documentary was back. Dante was walking through the lobby of a glass skyscraper, the very same building where Brad worked. The voice on the phone continued dripping with venom. The new owner was very specific, Brad. He told us he wants a clean slate. He personally pointed out the irregularities in your portfolio. He said he doesn't want pollutants handling his capital. Pollutants. The word hung in the air, a direct echo of Dante's wedding vows. You are fired, Brad Sterling said. And frankly, looking at what the legal team is digging up, you should probably stop worrying about your job and start looking for a lawyer who specializes in grand larceny. The line went dead. Brad let the phone slip from his fingers. It hit the hardwood floor with a dull thud. He looked up at his family. Bianca was staring at him with horror, not out of love but out of the realization that her ATM had just been smashed. He bought the bank, Brad whispered, his voice cracking. He didn't just invest. He bought the whole thing. He walked into the meeting with a file on me. He has been tracking every move I made for months. Elijah sank onto the sofa next to his wife. The color had drained from his face. He realized that Dante hadn't just outsmarted them. He had lured them into a trap. He had let Brad dig a hole of debt and fraud, waiting patiently for the moment to kick the ladder away. He knew Brad sobbed, burying his face in his hands. He knew I was blocking the loans. He knew I was stealing. He let me do it. He let me hang myself, and now he just kicked the chair. The flashbulbs outside the Ritz-Carlton were blinding, a relentless strobing lightning storm that followed us from the limousine to the revolving doors. It was the night of the Apex Charity Gala, the most exclusive event of the season, and our first public appearance since the documentary aired. I wore a gown of midnight blue silk, the exact color of the deep ocean where I had drowned my phone. Dante walked beside me, his hand resting lightly on the small of my back, a silent anchor in the chaos. As we stepped into the lobby, the roar of the crowd outside was replaced by the hushed whispers of Atlanta's elite. Heads turned. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. But before we could reach the ballroom, a commotion erupted near the concierge desk. A group of people pushed past the security guards, their movements frantic and uncoordinated. It was them. My mother, Vernice, was leading the charge. She looked manic. Her hair was perfectly coiffed, but her eyes were wild, desperate. Behind her, Elijah and Bianca trailed like frightened ghosts. They had somehow bypassed the guest list, likely by dropping my name before the security team could stop them. Dominique, my mother screamed, her voice cracking with a theatrical emotion that echoed off the marble walls. My baby, you are home. She ran toward me, ignoring the shocked stares of the senators and CEOs around us. She threw her arms wide open, aiming to wrap me in an embrace that would be captured by every camera in the room. She wanted the photo op. She wanted the image of the prodigal daughter returning to the matriarch's bosom. She wanted to show the world that she was still the mother of the billionaire's wife. She lunged for me, expecting me to freeze, expecting me to fall into the old habit of submission. I did not freeze. I did not flinch. I simply took one deliberate step to the left. It was a small movement, a shift of perhaps 2 feet. But it was enough. Vernice's momentum betrayed her. She grasped at the empty air where I had been standing a second before. Her heels skidded on the polished marble. She flailed trying to find purchase, but there was nothing to hold on to. She went down hard. She landed on her hands and knees with a wet slap of skin against stone. Her clutch skittered across the floor. The lobby went deadly silent. The only sound was the heavy breathing of a woman who had tried to grab a lifeline and missed. Dante did not move to help her. He stood like a statue, his face impassive. Vernice looked up at me from the floor. Her mascara was smeared. For the first time in my life, I looked down at her not with fear, but with pity. You let me fall," she gasped, shocked that her performance had ended in a bruise. "You stepped away." I looked at her calmly, smoothing the silk of my dress. "I did not trip you, mother," I said, my voice cool and clear. "I just stopped catching you. You have been throwing your weight around for years expecting me to cushion the blow. I am done being your landing pad." I stepped around her prone form as if she were a puddle of spilled water. Bianca tried to step forward, her mouth opening to launch an insult, but Dante turned his head slightly and gave her a look so cold it froze the words in her throat. We walked toward the ballroom doors, leaving my mother on her knees on the cold, hard floor of the hotel lobby, surrounded by the very elite society she had tried so desperately to impress. They were not looking at her with admiration. They were looking at her with the one thing she hated more than anything else: indifference. My mother was still being helped to her feet by a reluctant bellhop when Bianca made her move. She did not rush to aid the woman who had birthed her. Instead, she saw an opportunity in the chaos. To Bianca, the lobby of the Ritz-Carlton was not a place of public humiliation, it was a content set. She pulled her phone from her clutch, the ring light case already glowing with an artificial halo. She lunged in front of us, blocking our path to the ballroom. She held the phone high, angling it to capture her own face in the foreground, with Dante and me trapped in the background. She forced a smile that looked like a rictus of panic. "Hey guys!" she chirped at the screen, her voice shrill and vibrating with false cheer. "You will not believe who I am with, the power couple of the year. We are all here together, just a little family clumsiness with Mom back there, but we are one big happy unit. Look, it is my sister Dominique and her billionaire hubby. She tried to grab my shoulder to pull me into the frame to force me into the role of the smiling, compliant sister she could monetize. She was desperate to show her sponsors that she still had access. She needed to prove that the bridge wasn't burned, that she was still part of the inner circle. Say hi to the fans. Bianca pleaded, her eyes darting between me and the follower count ticking up on her screen. Tell them we are cool. Tell them the documentary was just drama. I recoiled from her touch. The smell of her desperation was more pungent than her perfume. Dante moved faster than I could process. He did not shove her. He did not shout. He simply reached out and plucked the phone from her hand, with the precision of a machine taking a component off an assembly line. Bianca gasped, grasping at the empty air. "Hey, give that back, I am live." Dante looked at the device in his hand. The comments were scrolling rapidly, mostly people asking why Bianca looked so sweaty and why I looked so cold. He turned slightly toward a passing waiter who was carrying a silver stand with a chilling bottle of Dom Perignon. Dante dropped the phone. It did not hit the floor. It landed directly inside the silver bucket, submerged instantly in the slurry of ice and water. The light on the case flickered once, turning a sickly yellow before extinguishing completely. The screen went black. Bianca shrieked a sound that made the guests in the lobby flinch. "My phone. My content. You just destroyed my livelihood." Dante wiped his hand on a silk handkerchief he pulled from his pocket. He tossed the cloth onto the floor next to her ruined device. "Find a new job, Bianca," he said, his voice low and cutting through her hysteria. "Stop using my wife's image to earn ad revenue. You are not an influencer. You are a parasite." He stepped closer to her, towering over her trembling form. "And let me make myself clear. If I see you point a camera at Dominique again, I will not just destroy the phone. I will buy the platform you're streaming on and ban you for life." Bianca stared at the ice bucket where her career was currently drowning. She looked up at Dante and then at me, expecting me to intervene to save her from the monster I had married. I looked at her. I looked at the sister who had faked invitations to humiliate me. "It is better this way, Bianca," I said softly. "Now you don't have to worry about the haters. You are offline." We turned and walked into the ballroom, leaving her sobbing over a bucket of ice water, mourning the loss of a connection she never truly valued, while the real world continued without her. Bianca was still weeping over her waterlogged phone when Dante turned his attention to the shadow lingering behind a potted fern. Brad was trying to make himself invisible. The arrogance that had fueled him at Le Bilboquet, the swagger he displayed while drinking scotch at the renewal party had evaporated. He looked like a man whose skeleton had been removed. Dante snapped his fingers. It was a sharp, commanding sound that cut through the murmur of the lobby. A member of the hotel security team, a man who looked like he bent steel for fun, stepped forward. He wasn't holding a weapon. He was holding a thick manila envelope sealed with red tape. He handed it to Dante. "Brad, come here," Dante said. His voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of a judge delivering a sentence. Brad hesitated. He looked at the exit, then at the security guard, and realized running would only make the tackle more painful. He walked toward us, his legs stiff, dragging his Italian leather shoes as if they were made of lead. Dante held out the envelope. Brad took it with shaking hands. He opened the clasp and pulled out the first document. It was on heavy legal bond paper. At the top was the logo of the United States Department of Justice, followed by the seal of the Securities and Exchange Commission. "What is this?" Brad whispered, his face turning the color of ash. "That is the audit trail," Dante replied calmly. "It details the $3 million you diverted from client accounts. It tracks the wire transfers to the Cayman Islands. And the document underneath it is your formal termination notice from the bank. I signed it myself this morning." Brad's knees gave way. He didn't faint. He simply collapsed under the weight of his own corruption. He fell to the marble floor, clutching the papers to his chest. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and wet with tears. "Dom, please," he begged, grabbing the hem of my gown. "You can't let him do this. I will go to jail. Federal prison. Dom, I have a reputation. I am family. You have to stop him." I looked down at the man who had flagged my credit. The man who had sneered at my husband's work clothes. The man who had tried to starve us out of our home. Dante stepped between us, breaking Brad's grip on my dress. He reached into the inner pocket of his tuxedo jacket. For a second, Brad flinched, perhaps expecting a weapon. Instead, Dante pulled out a money clip. He peeled off a single crisp $20 bill. He held it out to Brad, who was still kneeling on the floor like a penitent sinner. "You like to talk about money, Brad," Dante said, his voice devoid of pity. "You like to flash cash to prove you are a man. Well, here's a little liquidity for you." Brad stared at the money, confused. "What?" "It is for the valet," Dante said, dropping the bill. It floated through the air and landed gently on top of the indictment papers. "Actually, scratch that. They took your company car an hour ago. That 20 is for the bus fare. The police station is across town, and I hear the meter runs high this time of night." Dante took my arm, turning his back on the wreckage of the Williams family. Brad remained on his knees in the center of the lobby, surrounded by the elite of Atlanta, holding a $20 tip and the paperwork of his own destruction. We walked through the double doors into the ballroom, leaving the trash outside to be collected. The ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton was a sanctuary of soft jazz and crystal chandeliers, a stark contrast to the carnage we had left in the lobby. I took a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray, my hand finally steady. I thought we were safe. I thought we could finally disappear into the crowd of anonymous billionaires. But the Williams' arrogance is a persistent force. Before we could reach our table, a hand clamped onto Dante's shoulder. It was not the aggressive grab of a bouncer, but the firm, entitled grip of a man who believes he is still the patriarch. We turned to face my father, Elijah. He was not on the floor like Vernice, nor was he weeping like Brad. He had composed himself, straightening his tie and smoothing his silver hair. He was attempting to pivot to salvage the night by doing what he did best, making a deal. He ignored me completely, his eyes locking onto Dante with a predatory gleam. "Dante," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Quite a show out there. The women get so emotional, don't they? But we are men of business. We understand the theatricality of it all." Dante did not smile. He removed Elijah's hand from his shoulder as if removing a piece of lint. "What do you want?" Elijah Dante asked, his tone bored. Elijah chuckled, a dry, nervous sound. "I will get straight to the point. I saw the numbers on the screen, son. Impressive. But capital sitting in a bank is wasted potential. You need diversification." He stepped closer, blocking our path. "My logistics company, Williams Global, is poised for a breakout year. We hit a small snag with the supply chain in Q3, just a liquidity crunch. The banks are being skittish, but you know how they are. I am offering you a buy-in, a strategic partnership. 5 million gets you a seat on the board, and 15% equity. It is a steal." I stared at my father. He was asking the man he had evicted, the man he had called a grease monkey, to bail out his failing legacy. He truly believed that money erased memory. Dante took a sip of his drink, looking over the rim of the glass at Elijah. He didn't look angry. He looked like an engineer inspecting a bridge that was about to collapse. "I looked into Williams Global this morning, Elijah," Dante said. "I had my analysts run the full diagnostic on your firm while I was eating breakfast." Elijah's eyes lit up. "So you are interested? You see the potential, I see the liabilities." Dante corrected him. "Your fleet is outdated, your pension fund is underfunded by 40%, and your client list has shrunk by half in the last 2 years. You aren't experiencing a liquidity crunch, you are experiencing systemic failure." Elijah's smile faltered. "We can turn it around. With your capital, we can modernize. We are family, Dante. You owe it to Dominique to secure her heritage." Dante laughed, but it was a cold, sharp sound. "Her heritage. You mean the debt you were planning to saddle her with? You mean the reputation you destroyed?" Dante took a step forward, forcing Elijah to take a step back. "You don't understand how I operate, Elijah. I build things that last. I put my money into stainless steel, into clean water, into systems that purify." He leaned down, bringing his face inches from my father's. "I invest in the future. I do not invest in a rotting past. Your company is a sinking ship, and I am not in the business of buying wreckage." Elijah stood stunned, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land. The businessman to businessman mask crumbled, revealing the terrified old man underneath. Dante offered his arm to me. "Come, Mrs. Williams. I believe they are playing our song." We walked past my father, leaving him standing alone near the bar, clutching an empty glass, finally realizing that his currency was no longer valid in the world we now owned. The heavy glass doors of the Ritz-Carlton swung open, and the humid Atlanta night hit us, carrying with it the smell of exhaust and expensive perfume. The valet was already waiting. He wasn't driving Dante's old pickup truck. He was standing next to a phantom Rolls-Royce, a monolith of black steel and chrome that looked less like a car and more like a land yacht. My family was waiting on the sidewalk. They hadn't left. They were huddled together like rats on a sinking ship, their earlier arrogance replaced by a frantic clawing need for survival. When they saw us, they didn't lunge this time. They hesitated, broken by the night's revelations. "Dominique, my father," Elijah called out, his voice hoarse. "You can't just walk away. We are your blood. We raised you. We sacrificed everything to give you a good life. You owe us." I stopped. I let go of Dante's arm and turned to face them one last time. Elijah was right. In his twisted transactional world, I did owe them. I owed them for the roof they held over my head like a threat. I owed them for the tuition they paid only to mock my career choices. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a single slip of paper. I had written it earlier that morning, a final calculation of my worth in their eyes. I walked over to Elijah and pressed the paper into his hand. "It is a cashier's check," I said, my voice steady. $342,000. Elijah stared at the check, his eyes bulging. "What is this?" "It is the principal," I answered. "I calculated the cost of my private school tuition, my college expenses, the braces on my teeth, and an estimate of the food I ate at your table for 18 years. Vernice gasped, looking at the number. "Dominique, you don't have to do this. We love you." I ignored her lie. "I am liquidating my position in this family," I said, using the cold financial language they understood. "That check clears my debt. I have repaid my investors. We are now even." I took a step back, looking at the three of them. Brad was weeping silently. Bianca was frantically trying to dry her phone with her dress. Vernice and Elijah were staring at the money. "Do not contact me," I said. "Do not come to my house. Do not call my husband. If you do, the legal team will treat it as harassment." I turned on my heel and walked toward the Rolls-Royce. The valet held the rear door open. The interior was a sanctuary of cream leather and silence. I slid in next to Dante. He didn't say a word. He just took my hand and squeezed it. As the heavy door began to close, I looked out the window. The moment I turned my back, the veneer of family unity had shattered completely. They weren't looking at me. They were looking at the check in Elijah's hand. "That is mine," Vernice screamed, clawing at her husband's arm. "I paid for her school. Give me that check. It is going into the company accounts." Elijah roared, shoving her back. "We are bankrupt, you stupid woman." "It is my inheritance," Bianca screeched, diving into the fray, grabbing at the paper. "You guys ruined my career. I deserve that money." The window sealed shut with a soft hiss, cutting off the sound of their screeching voices. The chaos of the sidewalk was replaced by the hum of the air conditioning. Through the tinted glass, I watched them one last time. They looked small. They looked pathetic. They were tearing each other apart over a scrap of paper, oblivious to the fact that they had lost something far more valuable. "Let's go home," Dante said to the driver. The car pulled away from the curb, gliding effortlessly into the traffic. I didn't look back at the rearview mirror. I looked forward at the long stretch of road illuminated by the headlights, leading us toward a future that was finally completely mine. The saga of Dominique and Dante serves as a profound reminder that true wealth is never defined by the clothes we wear or the titles we hold, but by the integrity of our character. The Williams family, obsessed with optics and status, ultimately crumbled because their foundation was built on the quicksand of validation and deceit. They chased the appearance of power while rotting from the inside. Conversely, Dominique secured her future not by hunting for a billionaire, but by loving a man she believed was a plumber. She valued the human connection over the bank account, proving that loyalty is the rarest asset of all. The most crucial lesson here is the art of filtration. Just as Dante purified water, we must have the courage to filter the toxicity out of our own lives. We must be willing to walk away from people, even blood relatives, who drain our spirit, to make room for those who nourish it. When you strip away the ego and the noise, you find that dignity is the only currency that never depreciates. Are you holding on to toxic relationships just to keep up appearances? It is time to start your own filtration process. Share this story if you believe in choosing character over currency.